In June 1991, archaeologists digging beneath the heart of Mexico City broke into a ritual deposit unlike anything found before. Not a single offering, an entire buried archive, nearly 13,000 objects sealed inside stone chambers beneath the ancient ceremonial core of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital. It was, and remains, the richest single context ever excavated at the site. But many of the objects inside did not belong to the Aztecs at all. Some were carved centuries before the Aztec Empire existed, in styles belonging to civilizations that had already vanished by the time Tenochtitlan was founded. The Aztecs had not just found these objects. They had deliberately buried them as sacred relics of a past even they no longer fully understood. The year was 1978 when the first clue surfaced, not in 1991. That earlier date belongs to a different discovery, one that set the stage for everything that followed. On February 25, 1978, electrical workers digging near the Metropolitan Cathedral in Mexico City unearthed a massive carved stone disc, roughly 3.25 meters in diameter and weighing approximately 8 metric tons. It depicted Coyolxauhqui, the Aztec moon goddess, dismembered and defeated. That single stone triggered one of the most ambitious urban excavations in history, the Templo Mayor project, led by archaeologist Eduardo Matos Moctezuma. What began as an emergency salvage dig became a decade-long excavation that peeled back the layers of a living city to expose the ritual heart of an empire. But as the dig deepened, the finds grew stranger. Offerings buried within the temple's foundations included objects that predated the Aztec Empire by centuries, some by over 1,000 years. Olmec masks, Teotihuacan figurines, artifacts from cultures the Aztecs themselves regarded as ancient and sacred. To understand why this matters, consider the scale of deliberate curation involved. The Aztecs, who called themselves the Mexica, founded Tenochtitlan around 1325 of the Common Era. The Templo Mayor, their great pyramid temple, was rebuilt and expanded 7 times over roughly 2 centuries. With each reconstruction, new offerings were sealed inside the previous structure, like a Russian nesting doll of sacred deposits. Archaeologists have cataloged over 7,000 individual objects across more than 100 offering caches, with new deposits still being uncovered today. A striking number of those objects were already ancient by Aztec standards, deliberately collected from distant ruins and reburied as acts of religious reverence. One cache contained a greenstone mask crafted in the Teotihuacan style, a city that had collapsed approximately 700 years before the Aztecs buried it. Another held Olmec figurines dating to roughly 1,000 before the Common Era, making them over 2,000 years old at the time of their deposition. The Aztecs were not simply using old objects. They were building a theological argument in stone and jade, claiming spiritual lineage from civilizations they had never witnessed alive. This is where the story shifts from archaeology into something more unsettling. If the Aztecs were deliberately collecting and venerating artifacts from collapsed civilizations, it raises a question that researchers have debated with genuine intensity. Did they possess knowledge about those earlier cultures that we have since lost? Some Mesoamerican historians have proposed that the Aztec priestly class maintained oral and pictographic records of pre-Aztec history stretching back to Teotihuacan and possibly earlier. Not myths. Actual administrative and cosmological knowledge transmitted across centuries of cultural discontinuity. The bold version of this theory suggests that the Templo Mayor was not merely a temple. It was a living archive, a physical library encoded in layers of stone and offering, where each stratum represented a chapter in a continuous sacred history that began long before the Aztecs themselves existed. If true, The destruction of Tenochtitlan by Spanish forces in 1521 did not just end an empire. It erased a library that had been accumulating for over 2 millennia. Testing this theory required more than excavation. It required decoding the spatial logic of the offerings themselves. Leonardo López Lujan, who took over direction of the Templo Mayor project in 1991 and has led it for over 3 decades, developed a methodology that treated each cache not as a collection of objects, but as a structured sentence. The placement of items within a cache, their orientation, their material composition, and their relationship to the cardinal directions all carried meaning. What emerged was a pattern. Offerings associated with water, fertility, and the underworld were consistently placed on the western side of the temple. Those associated with warfare, solar power, and celestial authority were placed on the eastern side. This was not random accumulation. It was a cosmological map, reproduced identically across multiple construction phases spanning nearly 200 years. The consistency implied a priestly institution with extraordinary institutional memory, one capable of transmitting precise ritual protocols across generations without deviation. Then, in the site's 7th field season, López Lujan's team uncovered Offering 125, buried in the western plaza at the foot of the Great Temple. Inside were the skeletons of 2 golden eagles, precious stones, and dozens of ceremonial flint knives dressed to represent gods and deified warriors. Radiocarbon and stylistic dating placed the burial within the reign of Ahuitzotl, between 1486 and 1502 of the Common Era. But other offerings recovered nearby told an even older story. One contained a greenstone mask, carved in the unmistakable style of the Olmec, a civilization that had already been gone for roughly 2,000 years by the time the Aztecs sealed it into their temple. It had passed through unknown hands, across unknown distances, for 2 millennia before being buried at the center of the Aztec world. What the evidence confirmed is this. The Aztec state actively sourced, transported, and ritually deployed ancient objects as instruments of political and theological legitimacy. This was not accidental preservation. It was a conscious program. The Templo Mayor functioned simultaneously as a political monument, a cosmological model of the universe, and a curated collection of sacred antiquity. What it cannot yet confirm is whether the Aztecs possessed detailed historical knowledge of the civilizations those objects came from, or whether they were venerating the objects precisely because their origins were mysterious, ancient, and therefore powerful. The distinction matters enormously. One interpretation gives us a lost intellectual tradition. The other gives us something more human and more poignant, a civilization reaching backward through time toward ancestors it could not name, finding meaning in objects whose stories had already been forgotten. The excavation beneath Mexico City continues. In 2026, López Lujan's team announced that 6 separate offering boxes, uncovered across nearly 5 decades of digging, actually belonged to one single ceremony, a massive ritual performed during the reign of Moctezuma I, arranged in a full symmetrical circle around the Great Temple. It is now considered the largest ceremonial offering ever documented at the site, and researchers believe it required teams of laborers to haul stone sculptures weighing up to a metric ton into position by hand. No one has explained why the Aztecs organized their sacred history exactly this way, in a perfect circle spanning the entire temple. Whatever the full meaning was, it took nearly 50 years of excavation just to notice the pattern existed at all. Here is the question that stays with you after the excavation lights go dark. If a civilization as powerful and sophisticated as the Aztecs felt compelled to reach back 2,000 years to borrow legitimacy from cultures they never knew, what does that tell us about the depth of human memory and how much of our own past we have already lost without knowing it? What do you think was inside those sealed chambers? Share your theory in the comments below. If stories like this one pull you in, Orevorax is where they live. Subscribe and stay curious.